Yes.
Mr. Vineall, Mr. Hancock, I have a few further questions on various topics. First question, I think probably most usefully posed to you, Mr. Vineall. Is the intention that the various new payments, whether it's increased lump sums or in particular the spousal payments, the 75% payments, that the income tax and benefit position will remain as it currently is?
Yes.
I asked you, Mr. Hancock, about the extent to which you were able to give a commitment or assurance about the support being available for individuals as long as they need it, and you provided your answer in relation to that. We've heard some evidence or seen some evidence from Scotland that SIBs provide some form of written assurance to that effect, that that's the expectation, which has enabled beneficiaries, for example, to perhaps borrow in circumstances where they might not.
Yes.
Mr. Vineall, would IBS be able to, or would your department be happy for IBS to provide a similar kind of assurance in writing to beneficiaries?
If I could say, because it's a policy question, so it's really for me, I feel very strongly on this matter. People shouldn't feel like this support is going to end. They shouldn't. And so we'll take away and look at how we can provide that assurance more formally than, but I'm stating it under oath, and so I take very seriously the commitments I'm giving, but we should also communicate that directly to the beneficiaries.
Thank you. The next two questions I've been asked to raise go back to issues about budgeting and sources of budgets. And so the first question is really for whichever of you wants to answer. Will consideration be given to funding for the entirety of all the schemes being made other than as a part of the health budgets of the four nations, which was a solution favoured by Mr. Gething, so that the need to find funding does not need to be to the prejudice of other health needs?
Well, how this happens in the future will be determined by the spending review, so that is a question for the spending review. I can't give a commitment to that because that would obviously it requires that government discussion.
Is that something which can at least be explored at a government level?
It can absolutely be considered. I can see the logic to it, but the nature of how government finance works is that you have to agree these things in a spending review. But as I say, it's a second-order question. What matters is that people get the support that they need and that they can have the assurance that that support will continue.
And then this may have already been answered, but nonetheless I've been asked to clarify it. In relation to the March 2021 payments announced across the four schemes, is the full extent of increased costs for all four schemes for the next year coming out of the DHSC's underspend that was described? Again, whoever wants to answer that.
Shall I answer that?
Yeah.
The answer is yes.
Thank you. Mr. Vineall, the next question is for you, because I asked you about the exclusion of hepatitis B, or the non-inclusion of hepatitis B in the scheme. And the rationale that you gave for that was that there was effective testing for hepatitis B from 1972. Does it follow that the rationale for making payments to those infected with hepatitis C or HIV is an acceptance that the regimes in place to protect patients from those viruses was not effective prior to September 1991?
Yes, except I don't know what the starting date is. I know what the end dates were because it was indistinct when these problems first arose.
Again, it may be that we can pick that up by way of further written requests if we need further clarification. And then the next couple of questions are, again, I think probably for Mr. Vineall, and they're just to help people understand the parameters of what was announced in March, Mr. Vineall. The annual bereavement payments to spouses and partners, will those payments of 75% be in place to widows or partners of widowers of those who died before 2019?
I would need to go back and clarify that.
It's a very important matter for people, because in relation in particular to those who were infected with HIV, huge proportion of the deaths occurred in the 1980s and 1990s, so you'll understand.
Yeah.
And of course there have been many deaths subsequently, including from hepatitis C, long before 2017 or 2019. So
we'll take that away.
Thank you. And then a similar question in relation to the lump sum payments where they're being increased. If lump sum payments were received in the lower amount, 20,000 or whatever it might have been at a given point in time, before 2017, and the individual's no longer someone who is a current member of the scheme, will they receive an uplift?
Well, the expectation is it will apply to current scheme members only.
Again, is that something which can be taken back and reconsidered, because it may give rise to a whole fresh set of disparities, depending upon, for example, date of death or date when people became eligible to the scheme?
Well, I'm happy to look at the issue, but I can't give any commitment.
Again, I think it's likely that the inquiry will probably set out in writing a series of questions in that regard to try and understand
that would
exactly
be helpful,
what.
and then we can answer them.
Then the counselling service, the bespoke counselling service, and again, this is to whichever of the two of you would wish to answer this. Will that proposed service be available for all affected family members, even if they're not dependents under other financial aspects of the scheme?
I don't know the answer to that because we haven't determined the scope yet.
I think I can tell you that in relation to the other devolved nations which have it, it is open more widely to family members.
Yeah.
Can you think of any good reason that it should be limited to spouses, dependent children, or living beneficiaries?
Off the top of my head, I can't. But as I said, we're in the foothills of developing that, so I can't make any commitment at this time.
Last question, I think, for Mr. Hancock. It goes back to the position of those who are bereaved families who were not, where the bereavement is not at the death of a spouse or partner. Do you accept that bereaved families who received nothing from the schemes due to the exclusion of parents or children may suffer harm, psychological and emotional harm, due to the perception that the death of their loved one is worth nothing or their loss is of no value as opposed to others?
Well, their loss is important, and I mean, it comes to the heart of the problem, doesn't it? That many people feel that their lives or lives of their loved ones were seriously harmed, and in many cases cut short by action that was recommended by the state. And they feel that there hasn't been an acknowledgement of that. And one of the things I want to do today is acknowledge that. And I know that an apology was given by David Cameron when he was Prime Minister. But I which I reiterate, and on behalf of the government, I'm sorry, but I want to. There's more than that, which is acknowledging not only that I'm sorry for what happened and that this happened in the first place, but also then how people feel that they've been treated since, because I know that is important, and I know that that's another wrong that needs to be put right. I leave it to the inquiry to to answer the clinical question of whether there is clinical psychological harm. But what I can absolutely do is acknowledge the pain and suffering that has gone on for far, far too long.
So those are the questions I'm proposing to ask from those suggested by core participants. Do you have any questions?
No, I don't.
Can I just turn and see whether Ms Gray has any? No. Mr Vineall, first of all, is there anything you wish to add?
No, there isn't. Thank you.
Mr Hancock?
Well, yeah, if I may,
Yes.
I want to. There's something I want to say very directly to those who are infected and affected, because we've heard some incredibly moving stories so far, and there's many, many more still to come in terms of the pain and the hardship, and also the appalling stigma at the time of some people who were infected and their loved ones, and so, as well as reiterating the apology, I really want to make sure that that you know that we in the government support the inquiry to go everywhere and find every detail and hear all of the voices and to find as many answers as possible. And I've instructed my department to do that, and also to improve the financial support and to create parity as much as we possibly can. And I hope that this inquiry finally brings about the closure that many people are seeking, as well as, no doubt, making recommendations on the practical changes that we can bring about. I'm determined to make improvements even whilst the inquiry is ongoing, but then we'll also listen very carefully to the inquiry's conclusions. This is a tragedy that never should have happened, and we owe it to all of those who are infected and affected to make sure that it never happens again, and we learn all the lessons fulsomely. And I'm very grateful to you for your participation and the time that you're giving up, and to all those involved in the inquiry in trying to right this wrong.
Thank you, Mr Hancock.
Well,
Sir Brian?
you thanked us there. It's my happy task to thank you, and both of you, first of all, for what may have seemed at times like an endurance session earlier on this afternoon, because we went on without the usual break, and it is not easy. It's not easy for those who are listening. I appreciate, but it needed to be done, particularly at this time of the day and the time available. But thank you first, Mr. Vineall, for telling us things pretty much exactly as you saw them and see them. It's helpful to understand that, and thank you for your promise to answer your homework, which will come in a letter in due course from the inquiry, the various matters which have been touched on, which would benefit from further thought or further answer. Secretary of State, can I thank you for the clarity with which you've answered questions, and in particular for your time. I think everyone in the country will expect that you have been remarkably busy and remain remarkably busy on, shall I say, other matters. So your coming and spending this time for the inquiry, as we asked and arranged, is important to us, and you will appreciate how important it has been to hear from each of the responsible health ministers in each of the administrations. And although there are a number of questions which you haven't been able to answer because they're a junior minister's principal responsibility, nonetheless, it is absolutely right that you are the person who is sitting here, and I think you appreciate that, and I'm grateful for it. So thank you for that, and thank you for the commitments which you have made, which a number of those who are listening will, I'm perfectly sure, be very happy to have heard, particularly made in such uncompromising and clear terms. So thank you for that. I wish all of you a good weekend, but we have to look forward to next week.
We do so. We resume on Tuesday with 3 days of evidence relating to the Haemophilia Society. We have 3 witnesses giving evidence over Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. and then, sorry, I should say starting with Mr Weatherall on Tuesday, then Mr Taylor, then Ms Pappenheim on Thursday, and then on Friday we are presenting material relating to clinical and ethical guidance over the decades.
So another 4-day week next week, and we begin at 10 o'clock on Tuesday. So 10 o'clock on Tuesday. Thank you very much.